And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show, coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is November 28th, the 332nd day of the year. Just 33 days remain to the year is over with, and we get to do it again. And I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving Day, which was yesterday, of course. Holidays observances. National French Toast Day. Now, growing up, I never cared for it, but the way my wife makes it, I'll eat all she puts on the table. Buy Nothing Day. Give yourself a day to experience the simple joys of life. Discover the thrill of finding new adventures without spending a penny. National Illustration Day. Fur-Free Friday. Native American Heritage Day. From the unbelievable art to the deep spirituality, Native American heritage is a rich tapestry woven through time. National Day of Listening. Red Planet Day. And of course, we all know the red planet is Mars. Maize Day. In the kitchens and the fields, it's an unsung hero. The golden grain that fills plates from tortillas to cornbread. International Systems Engineer Day. National Flossing Day. Need to keep those pearly whites in top form. Brown Friday. Cinque Day. Your Welcome Giving Day. Albanian Independence Day. Honors Albanian heritage and resilience through vibrant festivities and cultural displays. Black Friday. It's the biggest shopping day of the year, so I'm told. It's the shopping frenzy that turns every store into a battlefield. National Bible Week. National Book Week. National Deal Week. Go discover those hidden gems and cost-effective finds while exploring retail options. National Tree Week. Artes Mundi. National Game and Puzzle Week. Better Conversations Week. Pattaya International Fireworks Festival. It's a vibrant annual event in Thailand that lights up the skies above Pattaya Beach with breathtaking displays. Draws thousands of visitors, both locals and tourists, every year to witness pyrotechnic shows from around the world. Firework artists from various countries compete to create the most stunning designs, making each display unique and captivating. And it isn't just about fireworks. It includes live music and delicious street food, cultural performances, adding to the lively atmosphere along the beach. This combination of dazzling lights and rhythmic sound and the waves makes it a magical experience. At least that's what some folks who've been there have told me. And of course, we're still having Blue Christmas. While most people are at home opening presents, emergency workers are on duty, ensuring the safety of their communities over the holidays. And it goes from November 27th, Thanksgiving Day, through Wednesday, December 31st. Famous people born on this date: Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Anna Nicole Smith. Yeah, she made quite an impression on a lot of people. Well, on that note, let us see what stories we have in the news. President Trump made an announcement. National Guard member Sarah Beckstrom dead after the D.C. shooting. She's 20 years old, from West Virginia. She and another guardsman were shot in Washington, D.C. Wednesday. According to all reports, the shooter was a Afghan who was brought over under Come On Down, orchestrated by President Biden. The second service member wounded in the attack, Andrew Wolf, 24, is still hanging on. Beckstrom is dead. According to President Trump, he's in very bad shape, fighting for his life. The suspected gunman, whose last name is Lockenwall, Afghan national, who President Trump called a monster, is also in serious condition. Officials, lawmakers offered condolences for Beckstrom's family upon learning of her death on Thanksgiving. She was, by all accounts, a young soldier and a patriot with her entire life ahead of her, according to FBI Director Kash Patel. Well, according to former patent chief, exposed as how Nancy Pelosi has blocked President Trump's plan to lower drug prices. President Trump will soon have an opportunity to achieve a political and economic victory that he nearly accomplished in his first term, till Congress undermined him at the last minute. That opportunity involves an upcoming joint review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, trade deal that replaced the North American Free Trade Agreement. All three countries will soon meet to discuss how the pact is working and hash out any updates that are needed. During the first Trump administration, under the Secretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and Director of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the undersecretary, worked on the intellectual property aspects of that pact. The president, U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer, and the rest of the team secured numerous concessions from our northern and southern neighbors to strengthen intellectual property protections. Unfortunately, one of the biggest concessions was a requirement that Mexico and Canada offer 10 years of regulatory data protection to cutting-edge biologic medicines grown from living cell cultures was excluded from the final version of the agreement at the 11th hour. That was done at the behest of the one and only Nancy Pelosi. Well, Cook County in Illinois has established a permanent guaranteed income program. The second largest county in the U.S. has established a permanent guaranteed basic income after the success of a previous pilot version. Cook County Board of Commissioners unanimously approved $7.5 million for a permanent guaranteed basic income program last week. Chicago, the largest city in the Midwest and third largest in the country, is the county seat for Cook County. Well, Cook County made headlines as it established a guaranteed basic income program after a lot of local governments across the country launched pilot versions. This program, guaranteed basic income programs have become a trend across the U.S. in recent years, and more than 100 pilot programs launched during 2018, or since 2018. Mayors for Guaranteed Income grew into a coalition of 150 mayors pushing pilot programs, offering low-income participants up to $1,000 a month with no strings attached. And the group has pushed pilot programs that have been adopted by municipalities across the country. The Cook County program was actually launched in 2022 with the aid of federal COVID-19 relief funds. Once the largest publicly funded program in the nation got $42 million in federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, the Cook County Promise Guaranteed Income Pilot provided monthly payments of $500 to 3,250 households over 2 years. No strings attached. Come on down, get your free money. Well, an Oregon father's outraged after discovering his 11-year-old son was slated to take a survey about sexual orientation. This survey was a state-issued sexual orientation and gender identity survey. Asked children to identify their sexual orientation, gender identity, and whether they're transgender. Chuck Gonzalez told Fox News he was made aware of that survey online. He did an interview Tuesday. His son, Maxwell, attends Mentor Bridge Elementary School in Hillsboro, a suburb of Portland, Oregon. He said, I might have got it through an email, but it was a survey that's asking our children, grades 6, 8, and 11, grades 6, 8, and 11, issued by the Oregon Health Authority, and survey and ask a lot of really confusing things to sixth graders. And one of those things it discusses and asks about is their gender and sexual identity. He said, when I heard about this, I went to the website, downloaded the PDF form, and sure enough, it was right there. The 2024 Student Health Survey asked questions about such as what is your gender identity, with the multiple choice answers being girl or woman, boy or man, demi-girl, demi-boy, non-binary, gender fluid, gender queer or questioning, and agender or no gender. A demi-girl or demi-boy, according to gender terminology, is defined as somebody who partially identifies as a girl or a woman. And a demi-boy is somebody who partially identifies as a boy or a man. That demi prefix is meant to communicate the belief that gender is partial, not whole. Other parts of their gender identity could be anything, including another gender, genderless, or fluid gender. You can be one thing today and another thing tomorrow. Well, for our education system to ask such silly questions is just very disconcerting, frankly. Well, angel families have thanked President Trump in a new Thanksgiving video for his border security efforts. The American Border Story has released a powerful new video featuring angel families, those who've lost loved ones to crimes tied to the border crisis. They're expressing their gratitude to President Trump for his tough stance on immigration enforcement. It's an 11-minute video released on November 22nd in honor of Thanksgiving and featuring country music artist Alexis Wilkins. Includes more than a dozen messages from angel families thanking President Trump and his administration. Joe Abraham, whose daughter Katie was killed in a drunken driving accident caused by an illegal immigrant, thanked the president for prioritizing border security and keeping our community safe. Well, Black Friday theft threat has turned the holiday weekend to a shoplifter Super Bowl, according to a former police detective. He's a former NYPD robbery squad detective, says the threat of Black Friday theft has turned a holiday weekend into a shoplifter Super Bowl. Retail robbery turning into a multi-billion-dollar business. 2024 report released by the National Retail Federation claims that retail theft has increased by 93% in 2023 versus 2019. Adding there was also a 90% increase in dollar loss due to shoplifting. Organization estimates 186.9 million Americans were shot between Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday. Former NYPD detective Patrick Brosnan told Fox News organized retail thefts is no longer simply petty shoplifting. It's now a whole different deal. He said organized retail thefts has become a very profitable business and is expanding faster than law enforcement can adapt. And I've seen people very openly grab things and walk out the door and nobody does anything. Unfortunately, more often than not, the district attorney who would have to prosecute the case took money from George Soros to look the other way because those poor people need those things that they stole. Well, Wisconsin divers revealed a mysterious underwater parking lot of ancient canoes preserved for millennia. They recently announced the discovery of a trove of ancient canoes in an underwater parking lot of sorts, including one that predates the pyramids of Giza. Wisconsin Historical Society announced this month its experts have identified 14 canoes in Madison's Lake Mendota so far, 6 of which were found this spring. And the Wisconsin Historical Society works with the first Indians of Wisconsin during the research process, according to the release. The Historical Society also recovered a 1,200-year-old dugout canoe in 2021 and another 3,000-year-old one in 2022. All in all, the oldest canoe is 5,200 years old. Most recent one dates back to 1300s AD. The vessels were used to catch fish, make travel more efficient, facilitate trade, according to the society. Well, millions are going to receive credit scores under new models, but experts are warning about an approval trap. Credit specialist Micah Smith says having a score doesn't mean mortgage approval. Is Vantage Score 4.0 and FICO 10T enter the market. This new credit scoring model rolling out across the mortgage industry could dramatically expand the number of Americans who get a credit score. But experts have warned that borrowers shouldn't confuse a number on paper with an actual loan approval. Well, Black Friday deals to shop right now all over the internet. You can get up to 65% off Bose and Levi's and DeWalt and a lot more of name brands. Well, the Anna Kepner, the teenage young lady who was killed on board the cruise ship, Anna Kepner's father wants his stepson to face the consequences. The father of the 18-year-old cheerleader was found dead aboard a Carnival cruise ship, says his stepson should be punished if investigators determine he had a role in her death. Christopher Kepner said his 16-year-old stepson had always seemed like a normal kid, and he's in shock over his daughter's killing. Anna, who was 18, was found dead on board the Carnival Horizon November 7th during a family vacation with her father, stepmother, grandparents, and some siblings. She was discovered wrapped in a blanket and covered in life jackets in a room she shared with her stepbrother. Well, that's a bizarre coupling. Her father said, "I want him to face the consequences, and I'll be fighting to make sure that does happen." He said, "I don't want to stand behind what my stepson has done." Now, he didn't directly say his stepson killed his daughter, but he can't ignore the fact that he was the last one with her. Her death's been ruled a homicide by mechanical asphyxiation, but authorities haven't announced any suspect or any arrest. She was found in the cabin she shared with her stepbrother, according to relatives. Now, for those that are not familiar with the term, mechanical asphyxia means an external force obstructs the breathing. Dr. Michael Baden, the former chief medical examiner of New York City, said mechanical asphyxiation is not always a homicide, but it can be. It's up to prosecutors to determine what charges should be brought. Well, a Colorado student is now in trouble for hitting an elderly man after a TPUSA chapter gets approved. This was a college student that was detained by a police officer earlier this month for hitting an elderly man during a campus meeting about approving a Turning Point USA chapter. Fort Lewis College campus police report details a student by the name of Megan Elizabeth Hope Mollett was called on camera and was detained by a police officer after she hit a local resident whose name was Dave Peters, who was celebrating the TPS USA chapter being approved November 7th. Apparently, Megan Elizabeth Hope Mollett is a transgender. She was very unhappy about TPUSA being approved. Well, there's a new report out that shows a rise in cigarette smoking among teenagers. Campbell Soup has weighed in on the executive calling the company's food feces for poor people in a recording. Martin Bali allegedly made offensive remarks during a November 2024 meeting. Campbell Soup fired this executive, who was allegedly called on in a secret recording insulting the company's products. The Martin Bali, who was a vice president of Campbell's Information Security Department, we heard on the recording, making vulgar, offensive, and false comments, according to a company spokesperson. After reviewing the tape, Campbell said he believes the voice is Bali's. He's no longer employed as of Tuesday. Got to be careful what you say. You don't know who's listening. Well, a major winter storm has wrecked post-Thanksgiving travel across 40 states. That's the north and the northeast. Cowboys George Pickens went airborne in a stunning maneuver to keep their drive alive. He showed up for the Dallas Cowboys when they needed him the most on Thursday. Had a quiet first half, playing against the Kansas City Chiefs, but exploded in the second half as he finished with 6 catches for 88 yards on 13 targets with a crucial 2-point conversion. He wowed fans on a play he made in the fourth quarter. On a 3rd and 8 at the Chiefs' 45-yard line, Dak Prescott found Pickens cutting inside before the first down marker. Turned around and found empty space, ran up the sideline, avoided one tackle, and then nearly hurdling Chiefs defensive back Trent McDuffie. Everybody was extremely surprised at his moves. Well, the PGA Tour has announced that Fuzzy Zoeller, who won the Masters in his first appearance at the Augusta National, is dead at 74. He's a 2-time major champion. His death's been announced by the PGA Tour. He was a true original whose talent and charisma left an indelible mark on the game of golf, according to PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan. His death was announced yesterday. Well, Gordon Ramsay, of all people, has blasted the Thanksgiving turkey tradition. He thinks you should use what he recommends rather than what is traditional. Well, there's a man with the most well-known name in world history. He's a politician named Adolf Hitler. He became a focal point of local election campaign. He's a Namibian politician named Adolf Hitler Unona, widely expected to retain his council seat in the country's latest round of regional elections. He's drawing international attention for a name he says carries no ideological meaning. He's a longtime member of Namibia's ruling SWAPO party. He's running again in the Umpunja constituency in the northern Oshana region. With a name like that, I'm sure he had a lot of fun coming up through school. Well, there's a star who is celebrating her being tested negative for cancer markers. Her name is Nicole Eggert. She says every day is like a gift. She was one of the stars of Baywatch, treating every day like a gift after years of battling breast cancer. UPS has grounded their MD-11 fleet indefinitely after the crash that killed 14 in Louisville, Kentucky. According to researchers, Alzheimer's risk has declined sharply with one daily lifestyle change, according to researchers. Increasing physical activity in midlife or later may reduce the chances of developing dementia by up to 45%. Unfortunately, you never know when some of the findings of these so-called studies are real or not. All right, we've been talking about a lot of different stories over the different shows. Yesterday, I talked about what's known as the Green Bicycle Murder, and it's one of the most famous cases in England. The man who is said to have later confessed that he did it was found not guilty. So that does raise a lot of interesting questions. Well, let's talk about the murder of the Wizard of Whist. Murder of Joseph Brown Ilwell. According to the New York Times, in discussing the murder, they said the type of man of which Elwell is an example of the type that invites crime. He had charm and money and solitude. These three things combined to draw by a subtle psychological law out of their lairs the criminal and perverse instincts of this supreme mystery. Well, this is a classic locked room murder mystery. Now, most folks don't really think locked room mysteries really do exist. They're the creations of mystery writers. People have been found murdered alone in locked rooms with no way for the killer to have escaped. Well, a lot of folks believe they can't happen. They're the imaginings of fiction writers like Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Well, the unusual case of Joseph Brown Elwell certainly will make you question that idea. It's a classic case which could have come directly from the pages of one of the masters of detective fiction. And the New York Times described this killing as the most remarkable in the annals of crime in this country. Well, he was born on Sunday, the 23rd of February, 1873, in Cranford, Union County, New Jersey. The son of Joseph Sanford Ewell and Jane Annette Ewell, previously Ames. He was a traveling salesman, spent long periods away from his family. And despite their long periods apart, the couple made up for lost time whenever they were together, and they actually had found time to have 4 children, Joseph Brown being the oldest. Well, you have to ask yourself if what was to do with that particular middle name Brown. That's with an E, don't you know? Well, if the legend's correct, the Ewells took a punt on giving their firstborn son the middle name of a distant but rich relation of Ms. Ewell, who belonged to the Quaker faith. It was hoped that in doing so, the distant relative might be flattered enough to look kindly upon the child and financially benefit him in some small way. Well, as the family grew, Joseph Stanford Ewell took a job as a broker so that he didn't have to constantly travel and be away from his family. Now, being a broker effectively meant he was the middleman for various companies and got a small commission on every sale he procured. Dabbled mainly in fish. Now, this was a precarious work and didn't always know where and when his next paycheck was going to come from. So in 1886, he took up the more lucrative and liberally paying job as a clerk for Norwich Union Insurance Society. Well, when he reached school age, the wealthy Quaker relative did indeed take pity on the Ewell family. They could see that Joseph Sanford Ewell was a hard and tenacious worker, but never just gotten the breaks he deserved. So in an act of charity, they decided to pay for Joseph Brown Ewell and to be privately educated. Now, with the private education, he'd be able to make something out of his life. He wouldn't be stuck in the boring job of a clerk or eking out an existence as a low-level broker. Well, Phillips Academy in Andover was considered a very choosy seat of learning. In fact, it's been described as the most elite boarding school in America. Even with a cost of $249 a year, adjusted for inflation, that's about $30,000 a year. Although today that school actually charges $58,000 a year in fees. But with the cost of $249, all prospective entrants had to submit testimonials of good character from a respected and upstanding member of their community. And they were expected to sit an exam, which they had to pass before the school would agree to educate them. And apparently, historically, only 13% of applicants cut the mustard, and Joseph Brown Ewell was one of the lucky ones. Surprisingly, he spent 3 years at Phillips Academy, but he didn't return for his final 2 years to complete his schooling, and nobody seems to know why. Some have suggested because, like that great bounder of fiction, Harry Flashman, who had gotten a local girl into trouble. In the local parlance, I mean he got her pregnant. Or had cheated in an exam, or disgraced himself in a school by getting uproariously drunk in a local tavern, and so he was expelled. Now, there's no proof that any of these was true. Might just as easily have been that academia wasn't for Ewell, and he wanted more practical experience of employment. Seemed for a little while that his distant Quaker relative had made a very bad investment in paying all that money for young Ewells to be educated. Came back home to his parents from Andover with his tail between his legs and got a humble job as a salesman at a hardware store. Well, he lasted 1 year in that job before he became an insurance broker just like his father, and then he drifted again into becoming a door-to-door salesman of insurance. Now, he was young and feckless and had no real direction in his life. Seemed like his father, he was destined to be a man of no significance whatsoever, living a hand-to-mouth existence from one meager paycheck to the next. Well, he might not have had a vocation in life, but he was a regular churchgoer, and he was respected by the many parishioners of the Tompkinson Avenue Congregational Church. Reverend George Meredith felt that he was a devout and hardworking young man, somebody whose moral and pious approach to life could be an example to other young men in his neighborhood. So he asked Ewell to help him organize a boys' club. It was while running that boys' club that Ewell was introduced to the card game to bring him fame and fortune, the game of whist. That's W-H-I-S-T. It's a card game played by two teams of two players. Now, it's a game I've never played. I hadn't even seen it played. And I don't really understand the rules. What I do know about them, they seem to be a little bit baffling. Now, according to what's written about the whist in Wikipedia, the dealer deals out the cards one at a time, face down, so that each player's got 13 cards. The final card that belongs to the dealer is turned face up to indicate which suit is trumps. And the turned up trump card remains face up on the table till it's the dealer's turn to play to that first trick, at which point the dealer may pick up the card and put it in their hand. And then the deal moves clockwise. Player to the dealer's left leads the first trick, and they can lead with any card in their hand. The players in clockwise order each play a card and have to follow suit by playing a card of the suit led if they have one. Player with no card of the suit led may play any card, either discarding or trumping. Trick's won by the highest card in the suit led unless a trump is played, in which case the highest trump wins. And play continues till all 13 tricks are played, at which point the score is recorded. If no team has enough points to win the game, the other hand is played. Part of the skill involved in the game is one's ability to remember what cards have been played and figure out what cards remain. Well, Ewell was instantly taken with that game, and he was good at it. In fact, he was very good at it. Pretty soon he's being courted by other good players to attend gaming parties where he earned the nickname the Wizard of Whist. As he began to play the game more and more, he lost interest in his church-going activities. Instead, he joined the Irving Republican Club. Now, he wasn't politically affiliated with the Republican Party. He joined the club simply because its members were playing a new form of whist that differed with differing rules called bridge whist. And apart from a changing in the values of the cards, a slightly more rigid form of etiquette during play, the most startling difference between whist and bridge was that gambling was actively encouraged in bridge whist, and players could double the stakes with each card played if they desired. Somebody with a natural talent as a card shark, the chances to make money playing cards was a godsend. And within weeks of joining the Irving Republican Club, Ewell was being invited to private high-stakes games at the homes of New York's aristocracy. That's not bad for a high school dropout who amounted to nothing more than a lowly traveling salesman. And it was seen as decidedly common to declare oneself a professional gambler in those days. And so for appearance's sake alone, he continued his job as an insurance salesman, although he changed his job title to insurance broker in order to sound a little bit higher class than just a salesman. Also had a lucrative career on the side, making money as a whist tutor, giving private lessons to those who wanted to better their game. And many of the clients he took on were women. In 1899, he met 23-year-old divorcee Helen Catherine Augusta Derby Hanford. And with Ewell being a known womanizer with his choice pick of the fair young maidens, many of his gambling friends were surprised when he turned the bitterness attentions onto this overweight and decidedly plain-looking divorcee. But for his part, Ewell was looked at as a canny old bird. It wasn't Ellen's looks he was interested in, or even her slightly snobbish personality. He was interested in her maiden name, Derby. The Derby family were rich beyond the dreams of avarice, and to marry a Derby was to be set up financially for life. The couple married on a Saturday, the 26th of May, 1900, at a private house on South 3rd Street, New York. The marriage was a quiet affair because both sets of parents were inveterate snobs and disapproved of the nuptials. Hillels might not have much money, but they were embarrassed because their son was marrying a divorcee, no matter how rich she was. That just was something that was not done. Derbys were richer than sin, but embarrassed because they felt their daughter was marrying far, far beneath her. One of the only things the couple had in common was that Helen was interested in bridge, whist, and wanted to know all about it. When Helen started to teach her, she was a very quick student and very, very good at the game. In fact, she was so good. She also began to privately tutor potential players. Helen tutored the men and Helen tutored the women. With Helen being one of the great Derby family, it gave the whist tuition the sheen of high-class legitimacy. Clients began to ask for private tuition from families of great repute and standing. Helen rose their tuition fees accordingly. It was through this new elite set of players that Elwell met William Kissam Vanderbilt, the richest man in America. Vanderbilt was the heir to a great railroad and shipping fortune, the owner of Madison Square Garden, a horse breeder of great repute. He was said to be worth an eye-watering $55 million. Calculated for inflation today, that'd be $1.5 billion. During their regular tuition sessions, Elwell got on so well with the Vanderbilt and his two sons that they invited the Elwells to Thanksgiving dinner at the family mansion. And Elwell was rather taken with Vanderbilt's son, Harold Sterling Vanderbilt, who for some unknown reason most folks call Mike. Indeed, Elwell and Harold Vanderbilt became the firmest of friends, and Vanderbilt went on to become Elwell's regular bridge partner. Well, back in New York, Elwell moved into an apartment on 64th Street, and Elwell became the director of the New York Whist Club, which was based on 13 West 36th Street. A lot of players, including Elwell, weren't really happy playing at the State Old Club. The fussy old management imposed strict and stringent rules on gambling and meant it was hardly worth a professional gambler's time to attend. After failing to try and change the club from the inside, Elwell helped to set up a rival club called the Studio Club that was based at 384 Park Avenue. Now, this membership was elite. It was kept small, only about 20 members allowed at any one time. And members had to have huge bank balances, and bets, of course, were unlimited. They met twice a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays. This was the making of Elwell as a truly independent, wealthy gentleman in his own right. All of a sudden, he was rolling in money. Reported by one source, Elwell was winning an average of $50,000 a night. This would equate to about 3 million pounds today, and that wasn't a bad night's work. He was well aware he had to lose occasionally and risk being labeled a card shark. Every now and then, he made sure he'd lost a high-stakes hand to keep suspicion away, safe in the knowledge he'd recoup the losses later on in the evening. Well, soon the Elwells were living like king and queen. Their house was filled with antiques, expensive and fine furniture and furnishings, and the walls adorned with priceless works of art that one visitor even commented it looked like the French embassy in Peking. Well, in 1902, Helen became concerned. People thought of her husband as a gambler first and foremost, and hardly ever gave a second thought to his cover as a phenomenally successful insurance broker. Well, to an inveterate snob from such a wealthy family, this just would not do. It might do harm to the grand old Derby name. So she attempted to give her husband's card sharking an air of legitimacy. Gambling might be a legitimate source of income, but being involved in literature was. Helen spoke with a friend who worked in publishing. They both agreed to publish a book written by Elwell, actually ghost-written by Helen, called Elwell on Bridge. It was a guide for beginners on the best methods of playing tactics. This book actually made the game look respectable and like a science, and not a seedy, dangerous way of making a fortune in cash the way Elwell played it. The book, of course, was an instant bestseller. Had to be constantly reprinted in larger and larger numbers. Well, not surprisingly, Elwell, or rather Helen, was asked to pen a sequel, Bridge Tournament Hands, and that was released in 1904. And then Bridge Lessons, Practical Bridge, both in 1906, and Bridge Axioms and Laws in 1907, and Elwell on Auction Bridge in 1910, and then Elwell's New Action Bridge in 1920. Each book was a huge bestseller. Elwell made between $7,000 and $30,000 every year from the sales of the books, and some obviously depended on if he had a new title released in a particular given year. Well, on Tuesday, the 23rd of August, 1904, the Elwells welcomed a son named Richard Derby Elwell. As Helen was recuperating from the birth, Elwell took a trip to Louisville in Kentucky, where he was planning on watching some horse racing. And he stepped out from a taxi outside of the Galt House Hotel. The woman stepped forward from the crowd, leveled a gun at Elwell, and fired off a shot before she vanished into the crowd. Well, luckily for Elwell, he wasn't in the least bit hurt. The woman had been a miserable shot. And he claimed not to have the least idea who she might be or why she'd want to kill him. Now, of course, the police found this somewhat suspicious. People don't want to shooting up folks for no reason. Still, if he didn't want to help in capturing the woman, there was nothing they could do about it. So the case was left open as an unsolved mystery. Well, it might be assumed this attempt on his life was made by a spurned lover. Probably wouldn't come as a shock that he wasn't exactly the most faithful of husbands. The couple had been drifting apart for some time, but the birth of Richard Derby acted as a huge wedge, further pushing the couple apart. By Helen's own bitter account, Elwell had a tendency to disappear for days on end without so much as a by-year leave. Pretty soon, the couple even had separate bedrooms and effectively living separate lives. And what was good for the goose certainly wasn't good for the gander. When Helen began to be frequently visited by a man named Charles Whaley, Elwell went mad with jealous rage. Elwell telephoned Whaley and hurled obscenities down the line at him. Then on Christmas Day, he sent Whaley a telegram where he point-blank accused Whaley of seducing Helen, and he demanded satisfaction. Whaley sent a telegram back stating, "I'll be pleased to meet you at any time. If you notify me when and where, I'll meet you then and there. I won't discuss any matters over the phone with you. Vituperation or abuse over the phone is simply the act of a coward." Years later, Whaley suggested Elwell did protest too much. And at that time, and even later, Elwell was or pretended to be jealous of nearly every man who was on friendly terms with Mrs. Elwell. Her card table friends numbered scores, and they had learned about Elwell's efforts to get evidence for a divorce, which failed completely because he couldn't find any evidence, or even invent any that might be satisfactory. Despite the marriage having become somewhat tumultuous, in 1909, both the Elwells and 5-year-old Richard Derby took a transatlantic family voyage on the SS Mauritania in order to Elwell to undertake a very special commission. He'd been hired to teach bridge to no less a personage than King Edward VII. Then on, Elwell styled himself bridge tutor by royal appointment and let it be known at home by wildly braggadocious letters that many other crowned heads of Europe had sought out his services while he was visiting the continent. The news spread around New York, high society like wildfire. Rich and I went wild for this gossip. When he came back to New York, he literally couldn't fit any further appointments into an already full diary and had to devise a waiting list system for his potential and legal pupils. Everybody wanted to be associated with the man who taught kings how to play bridge whist. Well, in 1916, the Elwells separated, and Joseph Brown Elwell left the family home and moved into his own apartment on Park Avenue. Helen sued him for a stipend, and resultant legal paperwork she filed gave a very interesting glimpse into how lucrative Elwell's card sharking skills were. She estimated he had a net worth of $600,000. That's about $36 million in today's terms. Made anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 a night playing bridge. That's about $60,000 to $450,000 a night, don't you know? She also added she'd known her husband to win up to $50,000 in one session. And on top of his regular winnings playing cards, he earned $18,000 a year from his bridge tuition fees. That's about $1.5 million adjusted for inflation. And average earnings from his books were $7,000 to a high of $30,000. Adjust that $7,000 for inflation, they came out to $415,000. So he was making a good bit of money. So given his immense wealth, she wanted $5,000 a year in a stipend. That's about $300,000 a year adjusted for inflation. He contested this, and his lawyers managed to barter Helen down into accepting less than half of that figure, just $2,400. That's about $140,000 a year adjusted for inflation. What the entitled and snobbish Helen perceived as a meager sum of money was to be paid to her at a rate of $200 a month. That's about $12,000 a month adjusted for inflation. And on top of this, he agreed to pay $600 a year for Richard Derby's education. That's about $35,000 adjusted for inflation today. And another $200 so that the boy could spend be sent to an exclusive summer camp. That's about $10,000 adjusted for inflation. Well, despite her excessive income, she screamed poverty. She admitted to her friends she'd have to move to smaller rooms in a far less fashionable borough of New York. Had to dismiss all her servants, barring a part-time charwoman. Even claimed to have been reduced to renting out a spare room to a gentleman friend in order to make ends meet. Although this later declaration may have simply been an excuse for her to have a live-in lover without raising any morally affronted eyebrows. Well, as his estranged wife cried poverty, Ewell began flashing the cash about and invest in property deals on the up-and-coming fashionable area of Palm Beach, Florida. He initially invested about $150,000. That's about $7 million today, adjusted for inflation. He did it with a property developer named Lawrence Green. Within 6 months, those properties had been sold, and Ewell doubled his money. So he invested in another development, being spearheaded by Green, and again, within 6 months, that new property sold like hotcakes, and he doubled his money again. He wanted to keep this eye-watering profits he was making from these deals a secret from Helen, so she wouldn't sue him for a larger stipend. And to this end, he set up a front company called the Beach Long Realty Company. And to cover his tracks, the so-called directors of his company were Joseph Sanford Ewell and a man named Edwin Rhodes, just so happened to be Ewell's chauffeur. Well, despite doing frequent business with Ewell, Lawrence Green claimed not to like the dandy gambler. He said Ewell was cold-blooded to the extreme, a poser, and he had far too much ease seducing the eligible widows and married virgins of Long Beach. Well, Ewell's success in property speculation led to his starting to play the stock market. He seemed to be naturally gifted at this and began to make money hand over fist, which he again hid from Helen through the front company, Beach Long Realty Company. Well, in 1917, he had a bit of a shock. He lost $125,000 in the space of just a fortnight. That's about $7.5 million, and adjusted for inflation. He stupidly invested in Russian stock just weeks before the Russian Revolution. Fright was enough for him to set up a trust fund that would ensure that if he lost all his investment money, he could still have enough money to pay himself a salary of $10,000 a year for the rest of his life. That $10,000 a year, adjusted for inflation, came out to $600,000 a year. The financial loss of investing in foreign shares made him suddenly distrustful of foreigners, especially Russians, and he joined a xenophobic organization known as the American Protection League. Part of this organization, he and his buddies worked alongside the Justice Department to secretly unmask and undermine the work of Russian communist spies. And his membership in this rather childish vigilante organization led to some researchers labeling him a spy catcher, and they wonder if somehow these activities led to his death. Well, despite the occasional loss in the stock market, he was still immensely rich in his own right. He used to cover the Beach Long Realty Company and invest in a stable of 20 racing horses. And prior to his buying this new venture, he had only rarely ever had the occasion to bet on the horses. As a way of making money, he saw betting on horses racing as too unreliable, too much of a game of chance. But he didn't mind getting in on the action if it was a surefire way of making money, which owning and breeding the racehorses certainly was. He co-owned the Beach Racing Stables in Covington, Kentucky, with an elderly horse breeder and professional turfman named William Pendleton. And it was claimed that Ewell used his new placement within the horse racing circles to read the runners and riders and owners the exact same way he could cold read card players. Tried to turn his cold reading of the jockeys and trainers and owners to his advantage and made more money betting against his own horses than he did from his horses winning races. But then in 1919, Ewell and Pendleton had some sort of undisclosed falling out. Pendleton sold off his half of the business to Ewell. Pendleton later declared Ewell played business too fast and loose for his liking and lived a whirlwind lifestyle that Pendleton was too old to keep up with. But the truth of the matter and true status of both their personal and professional dealings remained suspiciously murky to both the public, later on to the police. Another important character that came into Ewell's sphere of friendship thanks to his newfound interest in the stock market was a 40-year-old banker by the name of Walter Lewison. He was immensely wealthy and owned a private bank alongside his brother Frederick. Lewis's business interest began when Lewis helped invest in priceless works of art through making introductions to art sellers, evaluators, and auctioneers. And pleased with the way Lewis handled business, he began to ask him to handle more and more of his financial affairs. And Lewison was married to a dark-haired beauty named Selma, and pretty soon Lewison and sometimes his wife were like a separate guest at the New York City abode at 244 West 70th Street, and Elwell introduced the Lewisons to the allure of the bridge table. Selma, in turn, introduced Elwell to her 21-year-old recently separated sister Viola Krause, and Elwell was, of course, immediately smitten. Seems Elwell had a lot of love to pour around, and Walter Lewison was having an affair with a chorus girl and dancer by the name of Lenora Hughes, and Lewison made the mistake of introducing his mistress to Elwell, and was eventually set about seducing Lenora as well. Pretty soon, Elwell was bed hopping between the pair of buxom beauties. On Thursday, the 4th of December, 1919, there was a burglary at 244 West 70th Street. A neighbor saw the three incompetent burglars breaking the grill over the basement window and squeezing their way down into the basement. They were caught red-handed and didn't lose any property. But that event was important to how everything played out, as the burglary was the catalyst for having all the grills over all the windows replaced and new and extra sturdy locks being put on all the doors and windows. Locksmith seemed to remember issuing Elwell with 3 sets of keys for the new locks. One set for Elwell, one for Ms. Larson and the housekeeper, and one set for, well, somebody. Nobody really knew who this last set was made for. It's just one of the mysteries of this murder case. In the new year of 1920, Elwell went to Palm Beach to convalesce from a nasty bout of the flu. And as he recovered, his libidinous excesses kicked in once more, and he was once again getting himself into trouble with women. Late March, he was seen by Edwin Rhodes having a blazing row with an unidentified woman in the garage of his seaside retreat. He was overheard telling the woman he couldn't see her anymore, as her husband suspected the affair and had made serious threats toward him. The woman, of course, became hysterical and issued threats of her own. Elwell made a quick getaway from the embarrassing scene, and later that afternoon, Elwell ordered Rhodes to take him to the train station. He was actually beating what you might call a hasty retreat. He was going to go to the Phoenix Hotel in Lexington, Kentucky, and Rhodes should follow the following day in the car. May 27, 1920, Elwell got a letter from her estranged husband. She was surprised to get the letter. It's the only second time he'd contacted her since their separation 4 years before. Their only other communication had to do with their son changing schools, and in this letter, Elwell asked Helen if she would grant him a divorce. He was desirous of her meeting him for the first time since their separation in 1916. He wanted the meeting to take place in Reno, where they could get one of the gambling town's famous divorces while you wait. Helen wrote back what was effectively a blackmail letter. Said that thanks to the meager stipend Earl paid her, she was struggling to pay the lease on her apartment and was due to be evicted in October of that year. Couldn't possibly think of leaving for Reno with the worry of being homeless when she came back to New York hanging over her head. In other words, she wanted Earl to pay for the renewal of the lease on her apartment, and then she'd think about giving him that divorce he wanted. On Tuesday, the 1st of June, 1920, he came back to New York. His housekeeper confronted Ms. Elwell right away. She was confused why he had been away for sale sign had been put outside the property. He pushed her aside and said, "Don't worry." Elwell was worried, though. He was leasing the house from his attorney, Mr. Bernard Sandler, a man who had been introduced to Elwell by Walter Lewison. Elwell immediately telephoned Sandler, only to be told he was selling the property as a business investment. The only possible way Elwell could stay in residence was if he bought the property himself. Elwell was annoyed and flabbergasted. He didn't think this was the least bit gentlemanly behavior. He sure as hell wasn't going to buy the property for the inflated price Sandler was demanding. And Sandler told Elwell if he wasn't interested in buying the property, then he should make it available for viewings as and when needed. A few further angry words took place before he slammed down the telephone, vowing to find himself a new attorney. Well, when he first returned to New York, he initially appeared to be in his usual fine fettle. Then as he reached his second week, his mood seemed to darken somewhat. There was something wrong. Something was bothering him, and it wasn't the sale of the house. According to his housekeeper, he was restless and sleepless throughout the week. He was smoking more than ever. She also noted every single morning she found a handkerchief on Newell's bed doused in a woman's perfume. Eau de Cologne number 4711. And that was odd because Ms. Larson never found any other evidence of female staying the night. Well, on Tuesday the 8th, Ellen once again dined with a mysterious lady. He was doing that more and more. Different lady to the one he had entertained the previous evening. This woman, according to Ms. Larson, was short and plump, but pretty and dark-haired. Well, on Thursday the 10th, he dined at the beach racing stables. His old business partner, William Pendleton, was also paying a visit to his old stables that day, which seemed somewhat peculiar, seeing as he had no longer held any financial interest in the horses being trained there. Pendleton, of course, for his part, denied there ever was such a visit. Later that evening, Hill dined again, this time at the Ritz-Carlton. In attendance were Walter and Selma Lewison, Viola Krause, an Argentinian newspaper publisher named Octavio Figueroa. The meal was celebrating Viola Krause's divorce being finalized. Well, a little before 2 in the morning, the Lewisons, Viola, and Figueroa decided to go home. Who was asked if he'd like to share a cab. He said no, and he'd walk home. After the rest of the party departed in a cab, nobody is really sure what Ewell did next. There were various sightings of him after his friends departed. The sightings are all to be believed. They have Joseph Brown Ewell rushing hither and thither across New York City and having all manners of discreet assassinations and angry confrontations, all sorts of peculiar and shady characters. He was seen at the Biltmore Hotel in the company of an unidentified woman, Dunmarte Cafe on Broadway and 15th, and a gambling den on West 40th. Here it was alleged he got involved in a fight with another patron. Before the fight, he was said to be sharing a table in an intense discussion with a man and a beautiful woman. The woman bore no resemblance to the women Ewell had been seen with in the Biltmore. Later allegedly seen at 5 in the morning at Pennsylvania Railroad Station, meeting two unidentified men who were wearing expensive-looking suits and who might have been mafia types. Cab driver also identified Ewell, stating he saw him at 5 a.m. as well, but according to the cab driver, he was a quarter of a mile away from Pennsylvania Railroad Station in Times Square in the company of two beautiful women. Well, there was one sighting that was probably correct, but it was disregarded at the time due to the racism of the New York Police Department. Taxi driver by the name of Edgar Walters said he picked up Ewell at around 2 in the morning from outside the New Amsterdam Theater. Drove him to 244 West 70th Street, Ewell's home address. Walters positively identified Ewell when he was shown a photograph and stated he had recognized Ewell instantly and he picked him up as a fare several times before and knew he was a particularly good tipper. Now, despite this being a strong positive indication and the most logical answer to what Ewell probably did after his friends departed, got his own taxi and went home, the police completely discounted deciding on the basis the taxi driver was black. Well, it was in the middle of a heat wave by 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday, the 11th of June, 1920. It's already reaching 70 degrees. Ms. Larson got it to 244 West 70th Street at a little after 8:30 in the morning. Front door was locked, but when she unlocked the door, she stepped into the vestibule. There was an inner door, which was also firmly locked. Stepping into the hallway, she smelled a strong smell of cigarette smoke. That wasn't unusual. Ewell was a heavy smoker. Made her way to the kitchen, prepared Mr. Ewell's breakfast, and put the milk in a bowl of cold water so it didn't curdle in the heat wave. Made her way to the reception room. The door to the reception room was locked, and after unlocking and gaining admission, she realized Ewell sat in one of the plush red velvet armchairs that had been pushed up against the wall, wearing his silk red pajamas and a dressing gown. Took her a moment to recognize her employees. He wasn't wearing his toupee, his false teeth, or his girdle. His face and body was had a different public appearance. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back on Monday, and finish up the murder of Mr. Ewell. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening and a great weekend.